The cold was a living thing. It had teeth that bit into the flesh of her fingers, raw and split from the endless scouring of cast-iron pots. Ilara hunched over the steaming basin, the frigid wind slicing across the exposed skin of her neck like a razor. This was her life, a cycle of cold, heat, and the dull ache of hunger that never truly left her. They called her the Scullery Omega, a name spat like a curse, a constant reminder of her place at the very bottom of the northern ridge pack. She was an orphan, a stray taken in not from kindness, but for utility. She was another pair of hands to do the work no one else wanted. Worthless, invisible. Her stomach twisted with a familiar emptiness. The soldiers had eaten their fill an hour ago, their boisterous laughter echoing from the main hall. She could still smell the ghost of roasted meat and warm bread on the air, a scent that was both torture and a faint promise. If she finished the last of the pots, the cook might let her have the burnt crusts and the gristle left on the bone. A shadow fell over her. Ilara flinched, her shoulders drawing up to her ears. She did not need to look to know who it was. "Still scrubbing, little mouse?" Lyra's voice was slick with false sweetness, a layer of honey over pure venom. She was the pack alpha's daughter, beautiful and cruel, with eyes the color of a winter sky just before a storm. Ilara kept her gaze fixed on the greasy water, her knuckles white where she gripped the scrubbing brush. "The pots must be cleaned, Lyra." Lyra laughed, a sharp, unpleasant sound. She nudged the bucket of icy rinse water with the toe of her fur-lined boot. It sloshed, sending a wave of freezing liquid over the stone floor, splashing against Ilara's worn leggings. The cold shocked through the thin fabric, stealing what little warmth she had. "My, how clumsy of me," Lyra said, her tone anything but apologetic. "You are covered in filth, as usual." She leaned closer, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper that was meant only for Ilara, but loud enough for the other kitchen hands to hear and snicker. "Garrus was asking about you." Ilara's blood ran cold, for a reason that had nothing to do with the water. Garrus was a hulking beta warrior who looked at her with a predatory hunger that made her skin crawl. He thought because she was an Omega, she was his for the taking. "He says an Omega needs to be taught her purpose," Lyra continued, enjoying the tremor that ran through Ilara's frame. "He thinks you are too quiet, too proud. He plans to fix that." Tears of humiliation and fear pricked at Ilara's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. She would not give Lyra the satisfaction. She bit down hard on the inside of her cheek, the sharp tang of blood a small, grounding pain in a sea of misery. She would not break. "Not here. Not in front of them." "Leave me be," Ilara whispered, her voice tight. Lyra's smile widened. "Gladly. I hate the smell of desperation." She sauntered away, her laughter trailing behind her, leaving Ilara shivering in a pool of icy water, her heart hammering against her ribs. She finished the last pot, her movements numb and mechanical. The cook shoved a wooden bowl into her hands containing a few scraps of meat and a heel of stale bread. She took it without a word, retreating to the small, cold alcove that served as her sleeping space. She ate quickly, forcing the dry bread down her throat, her mind replaying Lyra's words. What would she do when Garrus came for her? No one would help. No one would care. To them, she was less than nothing, a tool to be used and discarded. A sudden gust of wind howled outside, rattling the shutters of the outpost. It was a vicious sound, full of fury. The storm they had been warned of was arriving early. It sounded like the world was ending. Ilara curled into a tight ball on her thin straw mattress, pulling her threadbare blanket up to her chin. She closed her eyes, wishing she could disappear, wishing she could be anyone, anywhere but here. The wind screamed like a banshee, and for the first time, Alara did not fear it. She welcomed it. Let it tear the world apart. What did she have to lose? The blizzard was not just a storm. It was a siege. Snow fell in a blinding, horizontal torrent, and the wind shrieked with a force that threatened to tear the roofs from the barracks. The northern ridge outpost was isolated, a tiny speck of warmth and light against a vast, churning sea of white. A crisis erupted just after dawn. The patrol that was supposed to have returned before the storm hit was missing. Worse, they were the ones carrying the vital medical supplies from the southern depot. The pack's healer was frantic. Several children were sick with lung fever, and his remedies were nearly gone. Panic was a low thrum beneath the outpost's daily rhythm. Warriors gathered in tense groups, their faces grim as they stared out at the impenetrable wall of snow. A rescue mission was impossible. To go out in that was suicide. Alara was tasked with hauling firewood from the outer shed to the main hall, a treacherous journey of only 50 yards that felt like a mile. The wind tore at her, stealing her breath and trying to rip the heavy logs from her arms. Each trip left her gasping, her face numb and her muscles screaming. On her fourth trip, she saw it. A dark shape half buried in a snowdrift near the edge of the woods that bordered the outpost. It was slumped and unnaturally still. Her first thought was that it was one of the missing patrolmen. Her heart clenched. She was forbidden from straying from her duties, but she could not just leave someone to die. Dropping the firewood, she fought her way through the deepening snow, the wind a physical blow against her body. As she got closer, she realized this was no one from her pack. The man was immense, far larger than any warrior she had ever seen. He was clad in dark, unfamiliar leathers, and a great cloak now caked with ice and snow was thrown over his broad shoulders. A wicked-looking gash ran down the side of his face, sluggishly weeping blood that froze almost instantly. He was dying. What was she doing? Getting involved would only bring trouble. She should turn back, tell the Alpha, let the warriors handle it. That was the smart thing to do. The safe thing. But his head moved. A slight, almost imperceptible turn. A low groan escaped his lips, a sound of such profound agony that it cut through the howl of the wind and straight into her soul. She could not leave him. It was not in her nature. She fell to her knees beside him, her own cold forgotten. "Can you hear me?" she shouted over the storm. "You have to get up. You will freeze." He did not respond. His breathing was shallow, his skin an alarming shade of gray beneath the blood and grime. She saw the deep, ugly wound in his side then, a puncture that had bled so much the snow beneath him was stained a sickening, dark crimson. Panic seized her. He was too heavy to move. She could never drag him back to the outpost alone, and if she went for help, he would be buried by the snow before she returned. There was only one choice. She had to tend to the wound here, now. Tearing a strip of fabric from the hem of her own tunic, she pressed it against the gash on his face, trying to clear away the frozen blood. Her fingers, clumsy with cold, brushed against the skin of his jaw. The world exploded. It was not a sound, but a feeling. A bolt of pure, searing heat shot up her arm, so intense she cried out. It was white-hot lightning, arcing from his skin to hers, flooding every vein, every nerve with fire. Her vision went white. The shriek of the wind faded, replaced by a deafening roar in her ears. She felt something burn. A pain unlike any other, sharp and agonizing, bloomed on the inside of her wrist. It felt as if a blacksmith's brand was being pressed into her flesh. She screamed, snatching her hand back as if she had touched a live coal. The man's eyes snapped open. They were not the eyes of a normal man. They were molten gold, churning with a terrifying light, like twin suns staring out of the storm. They fixed on her, and the intensity of that gaze stole the air from her lungs. He was no longer a dying stranger. He was a predator. He was power incarnate. He drew in a ragged breath, a shudder racking his massive frame. The golden light in his eyes pulsed, and a single word rumbled from his chest, a sound deeper than thunder, a sound that vibrated through the snow, through her very bones. You. Alara scrambled backward, falling into the snow, her mind reeling. What was happening? What had she done? She stared at her wrist. There, on her pale skin, was a mark. It was an intricate, glowing symbol, like a spiraling sun, etched into her flesh as if by fire. It pulsed with a soft, golden light, a faint echo of the terrifying inferno in the stranger's eyes. Fear, sharp and absolute, consumed her. This was magic. Dark and dangerous magic she wanted no part of. She had to get away, but her body refused to obey. The burning in her veins had subsided, replaced by a strange humming connection. It was a pull, a current flowing between her and the golden-eyed man. It terrified her, yet a primal, instinctual part of her she did not recognize felt anchored, seen. He tried to push himself up, his powerful muscles straining. He faltered, another groan of pain tearing from his throat, and collapsed back into the snow. The light in his eyes flickered, dimming with the effort. Her fear warred with a sudden, overwhelming wave of protectiveness. He was still dying. The bond, or whatever this terrifying thing was, thrummed with his pain. His agony was becoming her own. No, she whispered, to him, to herself, to the storm. She could not run. She could not leave him. Something had irrevocably tied her to this man. Leaving him to die now felt like it would mean her own death, too. With a resolve she did not know she possessed, she crawled back to his side. His golden eyes tracked her every move, no longer fierce, but filled with a dawning, incredulous wonder. I will help you, she said, her voice shaking but firm. She packed snow into the wound on his side, a desperate battlefield trick she had heard soldiers talk about to slow bleeding. She tore another strip from her tunic, her fingers trembling as she worked. He watched her, his gaze unwavering. The golden light softened, becoming less like a furnace and more like the first light of dawn. I have you, he rasped, his voice a low promise. And though she was terrified, a strange, treacherous part of her believed him. She had just saved a dying man, only to find herself bound to a force more powerful and frightening than any storm. Somehow, she got him moving. Fueled by a strength she did not recognize, a frantic energy born from the humming connection between them, she hauled him to his feet. He was a dead weight, a mountain of a man, and yet she found the leverage. He leaned on her, his arm draped over her shoulders, his sheer size nearly crushing her. The short journey back to the outpost was an eternity of agony. Every step was a battle against the wind, the snow, and the man's collapsing weight. His blood, warm and slick, soaked through her tunic, a stark contrast to the freezing air. The bond, this terrifying new sense, pulsed with his weakening life force. It was a drumbeat of pain counting down to his death. She did not take him to the main hall. She could not. How could she explain him? How could she explain the glowing brand on her wrist? Instead, she guided him to the one place no one would look, her own wretched alcove behind the kitchens. It was barely more than a closet, but it was sheltered. He collapsed onto her straw mattress with a ground-shaking thud, his breath coming in ragged, shallow gasps. The golden light in his eyes had faded to a dull, brassy sheen. He was slipping away again. "Stay with me," she pleaded, her voice cracking. She did not know his name. She did not know who he was. She only knew that the thought of that light extinguishing completely filled her with a dread that dwarfed all her previous fears. She pilfered what she could: a bucket of clean water, a few rags from the laundry, and a needle and thread stolen from a mending basket. Her heart hammered with the fear of being caught, but the urgency of the man's life overrode everything. She worked in the dim light, her hands shaking. She cleaned his wounds as best she could. The gash on his face was shallow, but the one in his side was deep and vicious. It was a stab wound, meant to kill. As she stitched the torn flesh together, her clumsy fingers brushed his skin again. The heat returned, but it was softer this time. A gentle warmth that flowed into her, chasing away the bone-deep chill. The glowing mark on her wrist brightened, and she felt a surge of vitality, not her own, but borrowed. It was as if the bond was trying to sustain them both. He let out a soft sigh, his tense muscles relaxing slightly under her touch. His eyes, which had been closed, opened a fraction. The gold was still there, a faint ember in the dark. "Mine," he whispered, the sound barely audible. It was not a question. It was a statement of fact, as absolute and immovable as a mountain. Confusion and terror warred within her. What did he mean? Was this a curse? A claiming? Her mind, raised on the rigid hierarchy of the pack, could only interpret it one way: ownership. Had she escaped the brutish intentions of Garrus only to be claimed by this dying, magical stranger? For 2 days, she kept him hidden. She smuggled him scraps of food and cups of water, moving like a ghost through the outpost. The blizzard raged on, trapping everyone inside and providing the perfect cover for her secret. She told the cook she was ill, a lie that was perilously close to the truth. The strain of the bond was taking its toll. When he was in pain, she felt echoes of it. When his life force ebbed, a crushing exhaustion fell over her. On the 3rd day, the storm broke. The sun, pale and watery, appeared in the sky. The work of digging out began, and with the clear sky came discovery. Lyra found her. She had come to the kitchens to gloat, to see if Alara was wasting away from her supposed sickness. She found her emerging from the alcove, her face pale and drawn. "Still alive, mouse?" Lyra sneered. "A pity." Alara tried to push past her, a bowl of thin broth held carefully in her hands. Lyra grabbed her arm, her fingers digging in like talons. "Where do you think you are going with that?" In the struggle, Alara's sleeve, already frayed, was pushed back. The mark on her wrist was exposed. Lyra's eyes widened. She stared at the spiraling sun symbol which pulsed with a faint, otherworldly light. Her grip on Alara's arm went slack, her expression shifting from casual cruelty to sharp, calculating avarice. She recognized the symbol from the oldest legends, tales told only in hushed whispers, the mark of a soul bond, the mark of a king's mate. "What is this?" Lyra hissed, her voice low and dangerous. Before Alara could answer, a low groan came from the alcove. Kale was stirring. Lyra's gaze shot from the mark on Alara's wrist to the shadows of the small space. She shoved Alara aside and peered in. She saw the huge, wounded man lying on the straw, and understanding dawned in her cold eyes. It was not just understanding, it was opportunity. "So," Lyra breathed, a venomous smile spreading across her face, The little mouse has found a stray, a very interesting stray. She backed away slowly, her eyes never leaving Alara. This changes things. She turned and fled, not to the Pack Alpha, but to Commander Valerius, the man in charge of the outpost. Valerius was a hard, ambitious man, known to have connections beyond their isolated pack. Lyra knew he would be very interested in a man who bore the marks of a rival power, and even more interested in the worthless Omega who was somehow bound to him. Alara's blood turned to ice. She had been discovered. She looked from the empty doorway where Lyra had stood to the wounded man who was the cause of all this. He was stirring more now, the golden eyes opening, clearer and more focused than before. "They know," she whispered, her voice trembling. "They know you are here." He pushed himself into a sitting position, his jaw tight with pain. He looked at her, his gaze sweeping over her terrified face. "Let them come," he growled, the sound a low rumble of impending violence. "I am Kale, and no one takes what is mine." The name meant nothing to her, but the sheer, untamed power in his voice was unmistakable. He was not just a warrior. He was something more, something far more dangerous. And she was tied to him. The soldiers came minutes later. They were not the usual pack warriors. These were Commander Valerius's personal guard, men with cold eyes and a brutal efficiency. They stormed into the kitchens, shoving the cook and other hands aside. Valerius himself led them, a cruel smirk on his face. He was a man who enjoyed his authority. Lyra stood just behind him, her expression triumphant. "There," Lyra said, pointing a slender finger at Alara's alcove. "The Omega is hiding him in there." Valerius gestured, and two of his guards stormed the small space. They reappeared a moment later, dragging Kale out. He was weak, still recovering from his wounds, and could not fight them off. But even weakened and held between two men, he radiated an aura of pure menace. His molten gold eyes were fixed on Valerius, burning with a silent, lethal promise. "Well, well," Valerius said, circling Kale like a wolf inspecting its prey. "Look what the storm blew in. You have the look of the Winter Guard about you." He saw the healing but still raw wound in Kale's side. "And it seems you met some of the Ember Covenant's knives." Kale said nothing. He was a statue of coiled fury. His gaze flickered to Alara, who was being held by another guard, and the fire in his eyes intensified. Valerius noticed the look. He followed Kale's gaze to Alara, then to the glowing mark on her wrist, which she was trying vainly to hide. His smirk widened into a grin of pure, predatory greed. "And what is this?" he mused, stepping toward Alara. He grabbed her arm, forcing her wrist up into the light. "A soul brand. By the spirits, you are his." He laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "The great Alpha King Kale, the supreme leader of all the northern packs, brought low by a shadow assassin and bonded to a worthless, packless Omega." Alpha King. The words hit Alara like a physical blow. This man, this stranger she had saved, was the king of all their people. A figure of legend, a being of immense power she had only heard of in stories. And she, the scullery Omega, was bonded to him? It was impossible. A cosmic joke. "She is not for you," Kale snarled, straining against the guards. The air around him seemed to crackle with energy. "Oh, I know," Valerius said smoothly, his eyes gleaming. "She is a key. My new friends in the Ember Covenants will be very interested in her. They have been looking for a way to break you for a long time. It seems this little mouse is the perfect tool. He shoved Alara toward his men. Take her. Put her in silver. The king we will keep here. A little insurance. No! Alara cried out, struggling against the guard. A primal terror, the fear of being separated from Kale, overwhelmed her. The bond screamed in her mind, a cord of pure agony being stretched to its breaking point. Alara! Kale's roar was thunderous. He threw the two guards holding him off as if they were children, the raw power of the Alpha King flaring to life. He lunged for her, his golden eyes blazing. But he was still wounded. He was too slow. Another guard slammed the butt of a spear into the back of his head. Kale staggered, his eyes losing focus. He fell to one knee, a low growl of pure frustration rumbling in his chest. Take her now! Valerius barked. A guard clamped a heavy, cold manacle around Alara's branded wrist. The moment the silver touched her skin, the world dissolved into pain. It was not like the burning of the brand's creation. This was a dead, soul-crushing cold. The bond between her and Kale was choked, strangled. The humming connection vanished, replaced by a shrieking void. The light from her mark sputtered and died. She screamed, a sound of pure, undiluted agony, and then her world went black. The last thing she saw was Kale's golden eyes, wide with fury and a pain that mirrored her own, as he watched her being dragged away. She awoke in darkness and cold. The pain was a constant, gnawing presence centered on her wrist. The silver manacle felt like it was leeching the very life from her, a parasite of ice and despair. The vibrant, humming connection to Kale was gone, replaced by a hollow, aching void. It felt like a part of her soul had been amputated. She was in a cage, the iron bars slick with damp. The air smelled of mildew and hopelessness. Where was she? How far had they taken her? The sense of dislocation was terrifying. For the first time in her life, she missed the oppressive familiarity of the Northern Ridge outpost. Days blurred into a meaningless cycle of darkness and a sliver of gray light from a high, barred window. They gave her stale water and crusts of bread, just enough to keep her alive. Her body ached, but it was nothing compared to the agony in her spirit. The silence where the bond used to be was driving her mad. Was Kale alive? Was he in pain too? The not knowing was a special kind of torture. Self-doubt, her oldest and most faithful companion, crept back in. This was all her fault. If she had just left him in the snow, she would still be scrubbing pots, miserable but safe. If she was not so worthless, so weak, she could have fought back. The Alpha King, bonded to her. It was a mistake, a cruel trick of fate. She was a liability, a weakness he was now paying for. One day, the door to her cell block creaked open. A figure stood silhouetted against the torchlight from the corridor. He was tall and cloaked in shadows, a presence so cold it made the damp cell feel warm by comparison. The little sunspark, a voice hissed, smooth and sibilant, like dry leaves skittering over stone. Awake at last. The man stepped into the faint light. He was unnervingly beautiful, with sharp, aristocratic features and eyes the color of polished obsidian. He moved with a liquid grace that was utterly inhuman. A palpable aura of darkness and ancient power radiated from him. This was not Valerius. This was something far worse. I am Vorlag, he said, his black eyes fixing on her. And you, little one, are the key to my ascension. Alara pressed herself against the back of the cage, her heart hammering. This was the leader of the Ember Covenant, the shadow assassin who had tried to kill Kale. Vorlag smiled, a chilling expression devoid of any warmth. Valerius was a useful fool, But his ambition was short-sighted. He saw you as a bargaining chip. I see you for what you truly are. He paced before her cage, his movements like those of a panther. You are a sun-touched, a descendant of a lineage we thought we had extinguished centuries ago, the natural antithesis to my power. Sun-touched. The words were meaningless to her. She was Alara, the Omega, nothing more. Oh, you do not know, do you? Vorlag's smile widened. The power sleeping in your blood is that of creation, of light. The very power that can undo a creature of shadow like myself. He paused, his gaze intensifying. It is also the one power that can permanently sever a soul bond and consume the life force of an Alpha King. A cold dread, deeper than any she had ever known, washed over her. He was not just going to use her as a hostage. He was going to use her as a weapon. A weapon against Kael. I have spent a century searching for a way to kill Kael, Vorlag continued, his voice dropping to a low, fanatical murmur. His winter guard is too strong, his power too absolute. But the soul bond, it is his one vulnerability. It connects him to you on a fundamental level. By draining you, by turning your own latent power against its source, I can drain him. I will hollow him out from the inside, and his throne will be mine. No, she whispered, the word barely a breath. I will not let you. Vorlag laughed, a dry, rattling sound. You have no choice. The ritual is prepared. Your latent power, combined with the severing effect of this fortress's shadow stone, will be more than enough. He gestured around them. This entire place is designed to amplify my magic and stifle his. He cannot reach you here. Despair crashed over her, a black, suffocating wave. He was right. She was weak, powerless, a lamb being led to the slaughter, and her death would be the doom of the man she was inexplicably bound to. The man who had looked at her not as an Omega, but as an equal. The man who had called her his. That night, huddled in the crushing dark, she wept. She wept for the life she never had, for the hope that had been kindled only to be extinguished, and for the Alpha King who was doomed because of her. She was worthless, a curse. The thought was a familiar, painful weight. She clutched the silver manacle on her wrist, the source of so much pain. She pulled at it, twisted it, her raw fingers scraping against the cold metal. It was useless. She was trapped. Hold on. The voice was not a sound. It was a thought, a feeling, a flicker of warmth in the vast, cold emptiness of her soul. It was faint, distorted by the silver and the distance and the shadow stone of the fortress, but it was unmistakably his. Alara's head snapped up. She stared into the darkness, her breath catching in her throat. Had she imagined it? I am coming. There it was again, a thread of pure, unyielding will cutting through the despair. It was Kael. He was alive. He was fighting for her. A tiny, impossible spark of hope ignited in her chest. It was a fragile thing, but in the suffocating darkness of Vorlag's prison, it felt as bright and as brilliant as a star. She gripped the bars of her cage, her knuckles white. She did not know what a sun-touched was. She did not know if she had any power. But Kael was coming, and she would not be a passive victim in Vorlag's plan. She would hold on. She would fight. The ritual began at moonrise. Guards dragged Alara from her cage and hauled her to the central chamber of the fortress. It was a vast, circular room, the floor a mosaic of black stone etched with glowing crimson runes. In the center was a stone altar, cold and foreboding. Vorlag stood waiting, his obsidian eyes gleaming with triumph. He was no longer wearing simple robes, but ornate, dark armor that seemed to drink the torchlight from the room. The air was thick with power, a heavy, cloying presence that made it hard to breathe. "The final piece," Vorlag hissed as they forced her onto the altar, chaining her down with more silver. "Tonight, a new age of shadow begins, and the reign of the Alpha King ends." He began to chant, his voice a low, resonant drone that vibrated through the stone. The crimson runes on the floor flared, casting eerie, dancing shadows on the walls. A vortex of dark energy began to swirl around the altar, a miniature tornado of shadow and malice. Pain, sharp and excruciating, erupted from the mark on her wrist. It felt as if Vorlag's magic was a hook, tearing at the dormant power within her, trying to rip it out. The hollow ache of the severed bond intensified 1,000-fold, a psychic scream of agony. She felt a distant, phantom echo of Kale's pain through their strained connection, and it was that which made her grit her teeth and resist. Suddenly, the entire fortress shook. A deafening crash, like the world splitting apart, echoed from the west wall. It was followed by a howl, a sound of pure, primal fury that was not one voice, but 100, 1,000. It was the sound of the Winter Guard. Vorlag's chanting faltered. A flicker of annoyance crossed his face. He is a fool. He cannot breach this fortress. Another crash, closer this time, and the sound of battle erupted in the halls. Shouts, the clash of steel, and the guttural roars of Kale's warriors. The main doors to the chamber burst inward, torn from their hinges as if they were made of paper. Kale stood there, silhouetted against the chaos. He was no longer the wounded man from the snow. He was the Alpha King, in his full, terrifying glory. He wore armor of midnight steel and silver frost, and in his hand was a great sword that seemed to hum with contained power. His eyes were not just golden. They were blazing suns of pure rage. "Vorlag!" His voice was not a shout. It was a physical force, a shockwave that made the very stones tremble. Behind him, his winter guard poured into the room, a tide of disciplined fury, and crashed into Vorlag's shadow acolytes. The chamber descended into a maelstrom of flashing blades, snarling warriors, and bursts of dark magic. Vorlag sneered. "Too late, King. The ritual is begun. She is mine to command." He turned his attention back to Alara, his chanting growing faster, more desperate. The vortex of shadow around her intensified, pulling, tearing. Kale moved. He was not just a warrior, he was a force of nature. He cut through the battle like a winter gale, his greatsword a blur of silver light. Shadow acolytes turned to ash before they could even raise their weapons against him. He was fighting his way to her, his eyes locked on hers, a promise of rescue in their fiery depths. But Vorlag was powerful. He raised a hand, and a wall of solid shadow erupted from the floor, blocking Kale's path. "You will watch, Kale," Vorlag shrieked over the din. "You will watch as I use your own mate to destroy you." He placed his hand on Alara's forehead. The cold was absolute, a soul-freezing void that threatened to extinguish her completely. The pain was unbearable. She felt her consciousness begin to fray, her life force being siphoned away. Through the bond, she felt Kale's strength falter as her own was drained. He roared in agony, hammering against the shadow wall. He was going to die because of her. Vorlag was winning. No. The thought was a spark, a single defiant ember in the face of an annihilating winter. All her life she had been told she was worthless, a nothing, an omega. She had believed it. She had let it define her. But Kale had not seen that. He had seen her. Hold on. His voice, a memory in her mind. Rage, pure and incandescent, rose up within her. It was not the petty anger of a hurt girl. It was the primal fury of a queen defending her king. It was the outrage of a soul that refused to be a weapon. It was a sun rising against the night. Something inside her, a dam built of years of abuse and self-loathing, shattered. Vorlag screamed as a brilliant golden light erupted from her body. It was not a gentle glow. It was a nova, a shockwave of pure, untamed creation. The silver chains holding her down melted into slag. The stone altar cracked beneath her. The vortex of shadow was not just dispersed, it was annihilated, blasted into nothingness by the radiant torrent. The light washed over the entire chamber. It did not harm Kale's warriors, but it struck Vorlag's acolytes like a physical blow, their shadow magic dissolving, their bodies turning to dust. Vorlag himself was thrown back, his dark armor cracking, his skin smoking where the light touched him. Alara sat up. She was no longer the shivering, frightened girl. She was glowing. Her hair a floating halo of light, her eyes the same molten gold as KL's, but brighter, fiercer. The mark on her wrist was a miniature sun, blazing with power. The dormant strength of the sun-touched was awake. KL had shattered the shadow wall and was staring at her, his expression one of pure, unadulterated awe. Vorlag staggered to his feet, his face a mask of disbelief and hatred. "Impossible! You are a worthless omega, a stray!" Alara rose from the broken altar and stepped onto the floor, the light coalescing around her like a royal mantle. She looked at the Shadow King who had terrorized her, who had tried to use her, and she felt no fear, only a vast, calm certainty. "I am no omega," she said, her voice ringing with a power she had never known, a voice that was hers and yet more. "I am Alara, and you will not touch my king." She raised a hand. A spear of pure, solidified sunlight formed in her grasp. Vorlag tried to summon his shadows, but they recoiled from her radiance, weak and pathetic. "This cannot be!" he shrieked, stumbling backward. "This is the dawn," she declared, and with a single fluid motion, she hurled the spear of light. It crossed the chamber in a silent, brilliant arc and struck Vorlag square in the chest. He did not scream. He simply dissolved, his body and his ancient darkness unmade by the pure, cleansing power of the sun, leaving behind nothing but a drift of fading ash and the echo of his disbelief. Silence fell over the chamber, broken only by the panting of the victorious Winter Guard. The battle was over. The light around Alara softened, receding back into her until only a gentle shimmer remained. The immense power settled, no longer a raging inferno, but a steady, warm flame within her. She felt drained, exhausted, but also more whole than she had ever been in her life. Then she saw Kale. He was standing a few feet away, his greatsword lowered, his chest rising and falling heavily. His eyes, those molten gold suns, were fixed on her, filled with an emotion so profound it made her heart ache. It was reverence. It was wonder. It was a love so fierce and absolute, it was terrifying. He took a hesitant step toward her, as if approaching a sacred thing. "Alara," he breathed, his voice rough with emotion. The strength that had held her up through the fight suddenly deserted her. Her legs gave way. Before she could fall, he was there, crossing the distance in a single bound. His strong arms wrapped around her, pulling her against the cold steel of his armor. It should have been uncomfortable, but it was the safest she had ever felt. She buried her face in his chest, inhaling the scent of winter storms, pine, and him. He held her tightly, one hand cradling the back of her head, the other pressed against her back, holding her as if he never meant to let go. "I have you," he murmured into her hair, the words a familiar, grounding promise. "You are safe." She looked up at him, her own eyes still shimmering with a faint golden light. "You were hurt." "It is nothing," he said, but she could feel the strain in him, the lingering ache from Vorlag's ritual draining his strength through the bond. She rejected his dismissal. She was not powerless anymore. She raised a hand, her fingers trembling slightly, and placed it over his heart, directly on the cold breastplate. She closed her eyes, not thinking, just feeling. She focused on the steady flame of power within her and willed it to reach for him, to soothe him, to heal him. A soft, warm light flowed from her palm, sinking through the steel of his armor. It bathed him in a golden glow. Kale gasped, a shudder running through his massive frame. He was not in pain. It was a sensation of pure, healing warmth, knitting together the frayed edges of his life force, mending the damage the ritual had done. When she pulled her hand away, a new mark glowed on the surface of his armor, right over his heart. It was a perfect mirror of the spiraling sun on her wrist, a brand of golden light that pulsed in perfect sync with her own. He looked down at the mark, then back at her, his expression stunned. She had not just been claimed by him. She had, in turn, claimed him back. The bond was no longer a one-way declaration, but a balanced, completed circuit, a union of equals. "My queen," he whispered, the words full of awe and utter devotion. He lowered his head and captured her lips in a kiss. It was not a kiss of conquest or possession, but one of reverence and profound gratitude. It was a kiss that sealed their bond, a promise of a shared future, a shared throne, a shared soul. They returned to Kale's capital, the heart of the Northern Territories, not as a king and his rescued damsel, but as two sovereigns returning from war. The news of Vorlag's defeat and the emergence of a sun-touched queen had spread like wildfire. The great hall of the citadel was filled with the lords and ladies of all the allied pacts. They were a formidable, intimidating crowd, their eyes sharp and assessing. Alara walked beside Kale, her hand in his. She wore a simple gown of deep blue, but she needed no finery. The quiet confidence and the faint golden light that seemed to cling to her were adornment enough. She felt their stares, heard their whispers, but for the first time, the judgment of others did not make her shrink. Kale led her to the twin thrones on the raised dais, great chairs carved from weirwood and obsidian. He did not take his seat. Instead, he turned to face his people, his voice ringing with absolute authority. "You know of our victory against the shadow. You know that the Ember Covenant is broken," he began, his voice silencing the hall. "But you do not yet know the full truth of it. The final blow was not struck by my hand. Our deliverance came from another." He turned and extended his hand to Alara. "For centuries we have been a people of winter and iron. We have endured, we have fought, we have survived. But today we are given a new gift, a new beginning." He drew her forward, his golden eyes meeting hers, full of pride and love. "This is Alara. She is the last of the sun-touched. She is the fire that drove back the night. She is my soul-bound mate." He then did something that stunned the entire court into silence. He went down on one knee before her, the great Alpha King bowing to the woman who was once a scullery Omega. "She is your queen." A gasp went through the hall. Alara's heart stopped. She looked down at the bowed head of this impossibly powerful man, her king, her mate, and felt tears well in her eyes. They were not tears of fear or humiliation, but of overwhelming, healing love. She reached out, her hand touching his cheek. "Get up," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion but steady. He rose, his gaze never leaving hers. He took her hand and placed her on the throne beside his own, a throne that had sat empty for 500 years. As she sat, a murmur went through the crowd, which swelled into a roar of approval. The lords and ladies, the fierce warriors and wise elders, all bowed their heads as one. She was no longer invisible. She was no longer worthless. She looked at Kale, her king, who smiled at her, a true, radiant smile that was like the sunrise after a long night. She smiled back, a warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with her power. This was not an ending. This was the beginning. She was home. She was loved. She was a queen. And from her throne beside the Alpha King, Alara, the sun-touched, looked out at her people, her heart finally, completely at peace.